Hey, chemistry students. Today we are going to be learning about the octet rule. So, what are our lesson objectives for today? We're going to be able to identify how many valence electrons an element has. We will explain why group 18 is non-reactive. We will explain how cations and anions are formed, and we will use the periodic table and give the ionic charge of elements. So, what is the octet rule? Well, atoms tend to want to have 8 valence electrons. This is called an octet of valence electrons. If we look at the periodic table, group 18, the noble gases, they have 8 valence electrons, and these valence electrons make these elements non-reactive. The noble gases are stable and do not want to gain or lose electrons. What are valence electrons? Electrons in the outermost shell of an atom. These determine the chemical properties of the element. The number of valence electrons in an atom is the last digit of the group number, except for the transition metals. So this is an exception for the transition metals. So group 1 will have 1 valence electrons, group 2, 2. But if we jump over to the other side, group 17, let's take the last digit of the group number, that'll be 7. So those elements in group number 17 will have 7 valence electrons. The transition metals, those valence electrons vary. They could have 1, they could have 2, they could have 3, they could have 4. Usually we are told how many valence electrons for an element that is a transition metal. An easy way to look at this is on a periodic table. So if we were to take a look, group 1, at the top here, it says 1 valence electron. Group 2 has 2. The transition metals, we're usually told how many valence electrons they have. Group 13 over here will say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The noble gases, except helium. Helium is an exception over here. It has only 2 valence electrons. Let's review what ions are. These are atoms or groups of atoms that have a charge from gaining or losing electrons. Cations are positive ions, and they are formed by elements on the left side of the periodic table, the metals, because metals tend to lose electrons. Anions are negative, and they are formed by the elements on the right side of the periodic table, the nonmetals, because nonmetals tend to want to gain electrons. So what are the ionic charges of atoms? You should write this at the top of your periodic table. So here we have it. In group 1, these elements have 1 valence electron. They tend to want to lose that electron. So if they are losing an electron, the overall charge will be positive. By how many? By 1. So same thing here in group 2. These elements have 2 valence electrons. It is very easy for them to give up those 2 electrons, and the overall charge will be plus 2. We gave away 2 electrons, so we have two more protons than electrons, so the overall charge is positive 2. Over here, positive 3. These here, the carbon group, can be plus 4 or minus 4. Negative 3 for these guys, negative 2. Why? Well, oxygen, everybody in this group, has 6 valence electrons. They want 8. So they want to take on 2 more electrons. So if oxygen takes on 2 more electrons, the overall charge is more negative. So we have a negative 2 here. Fluorine has 7 valence electrons. It only needs to take on 1 more electron. So that overall charge will be negative 1. I have a 0 here for these guys. They are stable. They don't want to gain or lose any electrons, including helium. Helium is stable with just 2 valence electrons. How do cations form? Well, let's take a look at the periodic table. On the left, we have metals. The metals tend to lose electrons. When a metal loses an electron, the positive charge is greater. For example, sodium has 1 valence electron. So it will lose that one valence electron and become Na plus 1. So here's a regular sodium atom, neutral. So in the center here, in the nucleus, we have 11 protons, which are positive. On the outside, we have 11 electrons whizzing around on the outside. So 11 and 11, that overall charge is 0, neutral. But when it loses one electron, we still have 11 protons, but now we have 10 electrons. So the overall charge is plus 1. If we were to take positive 11 minus 10, we would get plus 1. That's where that charge comes from. So we have a charged sodium ion of plus 1. How do anions form? Nonmetals, they're on the right side of the periodic table, they tend to gain electrons. When a nonmetal gains electrons, the negative charge is greater. Example, chlorine has 7 valence electrons. It will gain 1 more electron. So the overall negative charge is greater, so it will become chlorine -1. It gained an extra electron. So let's take a look at the picture here. Here's a neutral chlorine atom. It has 17 protons and 17 electrons. It will want to gain an electron to have an total valence electrons of 8. Right now it has 7. So if it gains 1 more electron, the overall charge is negative by 1. So that's why we write Cl -1, or you can write Cl with just the negative sign. So here's your learning check. You're going to tell me what is the ionic charge of magnesium, what is the ionic charge of nitrogen, and what is the ionic charge of chlorine. You can go back and use the periodic table, or you can use the notes from Schoology.